Hello, my friends. My name is Mr. Nighty Night. On this episode, I have something special for you. I've decided to combine 3 r/no-sleep stories into one long mega video. So, get comfortable, curl up in bed with your favorite plushie, close your eyes, and fall into a deep sleep while I read you a few bedtime stories. And remember, they're only stories until they're not. Nighty night, dear listeners. We weren't the first to visit the cabin. That much became clear when we found the diary. Our group had been looking for a remote retreat, somewhere to escape the daily grind. A secluded cabin, found deep in the woods with no phone reception, seemed perfect. We arrived with high hopes, ready for a week of relaxation, but from the moment we stepped inside, something felt off. The cabin was old and dusty, with a musty smell lingering in the air. It was immediately clear that no one had stayed here for a long time. But it was the diary we found on the table, half buried under a pile of old newspapers, that caught our attention. The pages were worn and yellowed, the ink smudged, but still readable. We took turns reading aloud, and as we did, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. The diary's entries were written in a daily basis, describing events that made our blood run cold. This is what the diary said. Mike and I had been drowning in work for what felt like an eternity. Deadlines, meetings, endless tasks. It was a relentless grind that left us both exhausted, our minds frayed and our spirits dulled. The constant pressure had worn us down to the bone, and when we finally got a week off, it felt like a lifeline had been thrown to drowning men. Mike's uncle owned a cabin deep in the woods, far from the city with no phone reception and nothing but the forest for miles. It was the perfect escape, a place where time moved slower and the worries of the world couldn't reach us. We loaded the cars with supplies early in the morning, leaving behind the concrete jungle, the endless noise, and the suffocating chaos of the city. The further we drove, the more it felt like we were shedding the weight of our lives, leaving behind the stress, the exhaustion, and the ceaseless demands. The road narrowed as we ventured deeper into the woods, the trees growing taller and thicker, their branches intertwining to form a canopy that blocked out the sun. The air became dense with the scent of pine, earthly and fresh, filling our lungs with each breath. It felt as if the forest was closing in on us, wrapping us in its embrace and drawing us into its depths. The cabin appeared suddenly, a solitary structure nestled in the heart of the forest, surrounded by a sea of trees. It was old, with weathered wood and a sloping roof, the windows dark and still. As we pulled up, a strange feeling washed over me, a sensation that we were entering a different world, a place untouched by time, where the rules of reality no longer applied. The first night was peaceful. We unpacked our bags, lit a fire in the old stove, and settled in with a bottle of whiskey we had brought along. The cabin was small, with creaky wooden floors that groaned underfoot, and walls that seemed to breathe with the weight of years. There was something comforting about its age, as though it had seen countless visitors before us and kept their secrets, guarding them in the shadows. The fire crackled in the stove, casting a warm glow over the room, and and we talked about everything and nothing, letting the stress of our lives melt away. The whiskey warmed our insides, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. But as the night wore on, something strange began to happen. It started with an odd smell, faint at first, but unmistakable. It was the scent of decay, like something long dead and forgotten. We shrugged it off, blaming it on the old cabin or perhaps a dead animal nearby. But as the hours passed, the smell grew stronger, more persuasive. It clung to our clothes, our skin, and lingered in the air even after we left the room. No matter where we went in the cabin, the smell followed us, an invisible presence that we couldn't escape. The next day, we decided to explore the surrounding woods, hoping the fresh air would clear out our heads and banish the lingering unease. The forest was thick, the trees towering above us like ancient sentinels, their branches knitting together to block out the sun. The further we walked, the denser the forest became, the path winding and twisting as though the woods themselves were leading us somewhere, drawing us deeper into their embrace. We stumbled upon the clearing, almost by accident, a barren patch of ground in the middle of the woods where the trees were blackened and twisted, their trunks charred as if by some intense heat. The ground was scorched, the earth cracked and dry, as though the life had been sucked out of it. In the center of the clearing lay a deer, its body contorted in an unnatural position, its skin peeled back to reveal muscle and bone. There was no blood. The ground beneath it was dry, as though whatever had done this had drained it completely. What could have done this? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, the words catching in my throat. Mike didn't answer. He was staring at the deer, his face pale, his eyes wide with something that looked like fear. Fear and something else, something I couldn't quite place. His hands were trembling, the knuckles white as he clenched his fists. We didn't linger long. The smell of decay was overwhelming now, thick in the air, driving us back towards the cabin. That night, the smell returned, stronger than ever. It seeped through the walls, through the floor, filling every corner of the cabin with its sickly sweet scent. We tried to ignore it, to convince ourselves that it was just the old wood, the musty air, but sleep was impossible. The shadows in the room seemed to move, twisting and shifting in the flickering firelight, their shapes unnatural, wrong. The silence was deafening, pressing in on us, broken only by a low, distant hum that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Mike was the first to hear it. "Do you hear that?" he asked, his voice trembling and his eyes darting around the room. At first, I didn't hear anything, but then it came, a faint scratching, like nails on wood, coming from outside. It was slow, deliberate, as if something was trying to get in, testing the walls, the window, looking for a way inside. We grabbed a flashlight and the hunting knife Mike had found earlier and huddled together, our breaths shallow, our hearts pounding in our chests. We listened, strained to hear, but nothing came. The scratching stopped just before dawn, leaving us in a tense, uneasy silence that hung in the air. The next day, we tried to leave, to escape the suffocating presence of the cabin and the forest, but no matter which decision we took, no matter which direction we went. The roam seemed to loop back on itself, leading us in circles until we found ourselves back at the cabin, the trees closing in tighter each time. It was as if the forest was alive, a living, breathing entity that had trapped us within its grasp, twisting the path until there was no way out. The walls of the cabin, once comforting in their old age, now felt like a cage, closing in around us, the air thick with the scent of decay. Mike began to change after that. He grew distant, his skin pale and clammy, his eyes hollow and sunken. He stopped eating, stopped talking, and spent hours staring at the walls, muttering to himself in a voice I couldn't understand. At night, I could hear him scratching his arms, as if trying to peel something off of his skin, his nails digging into his flesh until it bled. On the fourth night, I woke up to find Mike standing by the window, staring out into the darkness, his breath fogging the glass. "It's inside me," he whispered, his voice barely audible, his words sending a chill down my spine. "What is?" I asked, dread curling in my stomach, my heart pounding in my chest. He didn't answer, just lifted his shirt, revealing his chest. Beneath the skin, something moved, writhing and twisting, as if trying to escape, as if it were alive. I recoiled in horror, bile rising in my throat as I backed away. "We need to get out of here," I stammered, my voice trembling and my eyes shaking. But Mike shook his head, a hollow laugh escaping his lips, his eyes glassy, unfocused. "There is no leaving," he said, his voice tinged with madness, his words echoing in the silence. "It's part of us now." The cabin, the forest, it was all connected, part of something ancient and malevolent, something that had been waiting for us, drawing us in. The smell, the clearing, the twisted trees, they were all signs, warnings we had ignored. And now it was too late. We were trapped, caught in the web of something we couldn't understand. Something was slowly consuming us. That night, I stayed up, unable to sleep, my eyes fixed on the shadows that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The smell was everywhere, filling my lungs, seeping into my skin, into my mind. I could feel it now, under my skin, crawling through my veins, a sickness no medicine could cure. But I fought it, clinging to my last shreds of sanity, the last remnants of who I was. I'm still here, but Mike is gone, vanished into the forest, yet I remain. The smell is inside me, the scratching in my mind, but I fight it. I stay awake, keep the fire burning, because I know that once the light goes out, it will take me too. The fire is my only defense, the only thing keeping the darkness at bay. I don't know how long I've been here. Days, weeks, it all blurs together. Time losing all meaning in this place. The road still leads back to the cabin, the trees closing in tighter each time I try to leave, their branches clawing at me, pulling me back. But I'm still alive. I write this down hoping that somebody will find it, that somebody will understand what happened here, that they will heed my warning. The fire is dying now, the flames flickering, casting long shadows that dance on the walls. The scratching is getting louder, the sounds of wood on nail. The smell stronger, filling every breath, every thought. I can feel it growing inside of me, but I won't let it win. I can't. I'll fight it until the end, until there's nothing left of me to fight. If you find this, don't come looking for me. Don't come here at all. Just stay away. This place, it's not what it seems. It's a trap, a snare, waiting for those who are foolish enough to enter. And once you're here, there's no escape. No way out. Only the smell, the scratching, and the darkness that waits. When we finish reading, a heavy silence settles over us. The diary's contents were horrifying, but we initially dismissed them as elaborate fiction, one of those local legends designed to scare off visitors. It seemed too fantastical, too outlandish to be taken seriously. However, as we lingered in the cabin's oppressive atmosphere, thick, suffocating, and cold, we began to feel a creeping sense of dread. "We need to get out of here," someone finally said, their voice barely a whisper, crackling with fear. We packed up quickly, the diary carefully wrapped and stowed away. The road back felt endless, the trees pressing in as if they were trying to keep us there. The oppressive sense of being watched never left us, and we couldn't shake the feeling that there was something following us. Back in the safety of our own homes, we debated with what to do with the diary. It felt too dangerous to simply discard, so we turned it over to local authorities, hoping they could investigate and perhaps put an end to the horrors described within. Months later, one of our friends, skeptical and curious, decided to visit the cabin on a dare. He was determined to prove that the diary was just a hoax. We tried to dissuade him, but his resolve was unshakable. He went alone, armed with nothing but his bravado and a camera. He never came back. A search party was sent, but all they found was the cabin, eerily quiet and untouched. In a room, they discovered a roughly written note on a single page, scrawled in a hurried, trembling hand. It read almost the same as the diary. "If you were reading this, then you were in the same place I was. The darkness is real. It watches, it waits, and it consumes. I thought I could escape, but the forest is not so forgiving. The smell, the scratching, it's all true. It has taken me. I am no longer in control. If you value your life, leave now. The forest never forgets, and once you're trapped, there's no escaping its grasp. Burn this note and never return. The darkness will claim you just as it claimed me." The discovery of the note only deepened the mystery. It was as though the forest had claimed him, just as it had the others before him. The cabin remains a place of eerie legend. According to local lore, anyone who stays there for more than one night vanishes without a trace, leaving only whispers of their final moment. If you were reading this, take heed. We escaped, but the forest might still be waiting, patient and eternal. The diary's warnings are real, and the darkness in those woods is unforgiving. Be cautious. Never venture into those woods. The fear lingers, and the scratching echoes in our minds. We left with our lives, but who knows if the forest will ever truly let go of those who dare disturb its silence. It was the middle of the night, and I was alone in my apartment. I live in an old building, the kind that creaks and groans with every shift in temperature. I've always been a night owl, so it wasn't unusual for me to be awake at 3 a.m., scrolling mindlessly through my phone. The whisper came from the hallway outside my bedroom, just a faint, breathy sound that I couldn't quite catch. I froze, staring at the door, half expecting somebody to knock or walk in, but there was nothing. No footsteps, no more whispers, just the low hum of my refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floorboards. I shook it off as my mind playing tricks on me and went back to my phone. But then it happened again. This time it was clear, almost as if somebody was standing right outside my door. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable, pleading and desperate. I sat up, my heart pounding in my chest. I listened carefully, trying to make sense of what I was hearing, but the whisper had stopped again. Maybe it was a neighbor, I thought. The walls in this building are thin, and I've heard snippets of conversations before. But this didn't sound like it was coming from another apartment. It sounded like it was right there, in my hallway. I got out of bed, slowly and quietly, and crept toward the door. I pressed my ear against the wood, holding my breath, listening. Nothing. Just silence. I waited for a few more minutes, then finally decided I was being ridiculous. I was too tired to be spooked by what was probably just the wind or my imagination running wild. But as I turned back to head to bed, the whisper came again, this time louder. I whipped around, my hand reaching for the door handle. The voice was cleaner now, a soft, trembling whisper. "Please let me in." My blood ran cold. I didn't know what possessed me, but I yanked open the door without thinking. The hallway was empty. I stood there, my heart racing, trying to make sense of what just happened. The light above me flickered, casting strange shadows on the walls. I could feel the cold draft coming from the window at the end of the hallway, but there was no sign of anyone. I slammed the door shut, locking it quickly. My hands were shaking as I backed away, staring at the door as if it might burst open at any moment. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the whisper again, just outside the door, begging to be let in. Over the next few days, it got worse. The whisper became more frequent, more intense, more insistent. It followed me everywhere in the apartment, the bathroom, the kitchen, even the living room. But it was always just out of reach, just beyond the door or around the corner. Please, let me in. I tried ignoring it, drowning it out with music or the TV, but nothing worked. The whisper cut everything, a constant chilling presence that I could not escape. One night, after days of torment, I finally broke down. I was exhausted, scared, and desperate for it to stop. I sat on the floor in front of the door, tears streaming down my face, and whispered back, "What do you want?" For a moment there was silence. Then the voice responded, clearer than ever before. "I just want to come home." My heart skipped a beat. I didn't know what to say, what to do. My mind raced, trying to understand what was happening, but nothing made sense. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. The whisper was so soft, I almost didn't hear it. "I used to live here." I felt a chill run down my spine. I had never heard anything about my apartment being haunted, and I'd been living there for years. But the fear in the whisper was real, tangible. Why can't you come in?" I asked, dreading the answer. There was a long pause, and then finally the whisper responded, so faint it was almost lost in the silence. I'm trapped. I need you to let me in. I didn't know what to do. Every instinct told me to leave, to get out of that apartment and to never look back. But something kept me rooted to the spot, staring at the door, feeling the weight of the presence beyond it. I wanted to help, but I was too scared. The whisper came one last time, pleading, desperate. Please, let me in. I took a deep breath, reached out to unlock the door, and just as my hand touched the lock, everything went silent. The whisper was gone. I waited for what felt like an eternity, but it never returned. The apartment was quiet, eerily so. I moved out the next day, too unnerved to stay for another night. But sometimes, late at night in my new place, I think I hear it again. A faint whisper begging to be let in. Let me in.
Screw this job. I never thought I'd say that, to curse the career I've loved for the past 12 years. But here I am, ready to kiss it all goodbye. I'm not even gonna show up to work today, not after what happened last night. It was 1:45 when I got the call. A domestic disturbance on the 1500th block. It was a slow night, and I'd been sitting in my cruiser for most of it, so having something to do was relieving. The call didn't seem too urgent. A neighbor reported hearing a woman screaming down the hall of her apartment building. Most of the time, these calls never amounted to anything, usually turning out to be a mother reprimanding her unruly children or a husband getting an earful from his angry wife. God knows I know what that's like. I didn't even turn on my sirens when I pulled into the empty road. I pulled up to the apartment complex and reported my status to dispatch. The radio sputtered, and the woman on the other end confirmed my arrival. The static of her voice echoed throughout the night. There were a few curious eyes looking through the windows, nosy neighbors ready to see why a police cruiser was in the parking lot. I tried ignoring them, but even after all these years, it still unsettled me to be the messenger of the malls, like the retreating dark clouds after a torrential downpour. I walked down the hall, and the blinds closed as the bad omen strutted past the glass. I tried not to take it to heart, but it gets to you sometimes. I reached the stairs and made my way to the 3rd floor. The hall was dark. A few pothole lights illuminated the passageway. They buzzed overhead with an electric hum, ready to burn out at any second. Although no one was watching me through the windows on this floor, I still felt like something was there. There was a primal uneasiness that made the hairs on my neck stand on end. Walking forward, the clinking of my shoes on the concrete, an ungraceful presence in the eerie calmness. I found myself fighting to not put my hand over my holstered pistol. I couldn't be another trigger-happy cops, the rotten eggs you see in the news. But I still had my fists clenched at my side. I'm a grown man, but I'm still wary of the monsters that lurk in the dark. Only after all these years, I've learned that people are the root of all evil. The father who abuses his children, the murderer who kills out of spite, the old lady with a murderous twinkle in her eyes. She's watching me. Through a crack in the door, her undulating eyes screaming bloody murder. It startled me when I saw her. I hadn't even heard the door creak open. She whispered to me, beckoning me over with a gnarled arthritic finger. My stomach was in knots. Something told me not to get closer. There was a vitriol disgust in my mouth, like looking at the necrotic flesh of a dying animal. Maybe it was her balding, unkempt hair, or the toothless, gritted mouth, but she didn't seem too very friendly. But I had an obligation to step forward. to help anyone in need, and by the state of her gaunt face, this woman needed my help. Her voice was shaky, a mix of fear and malnutrition. "What took you so long?" I was confused by her question. Fear was slowing my mind, but when I looked at the number on the door, I made the connection. This was the address that had placed the 911 call. I composed myself and asked her details of the situation, but she shushed me, telling me to keep quiet. She looked down the hall, making sure no one had heard us. She nearly closed the door in my face when one of the lights overhead flickered, her eyes pleading to me to come closer. I hesitated, but obliged. "It's down the hall. It's watching us." I felt a flutter in my chest at the ominous tone in her voice. A horrendous screech made its way down the corridor and almost knocked me on my back. The old woman slammed the door, and I finally had my hand on the gun. On the far end of the hall, crouched at an intersecting passage, a woman, naked and bare, trembling like a stray dog. My left hand reached for my flashlight, but I had a hard time turning it on, instinct telling me not to look at the sickly figure caressing its knees. But I flipped the switch, the hall glowing a bright white as the woman was suddenly in the spotlight. She looked like she had been crying, rocking back and forth, her hair draped over her face. Yet there was no whimpering. I called out, asking her if everything was okay, as if I didn't already know. She looked famished, skin and bones, her ribs visible through her chest. I took a step. Her body shuddered as my foot struck the ground. I assured her that everything was okay, not sure who I was trying to comfort, her or myself. I reached for my radio, pinned to my chest, and requested EMS, but dispatch did not respond. No one was there, and the woman had stopped shivering. For some reason, I felt like I had just stepped on a pressure-sensitive landmine, and the moment I moved, I was done for. I tried swallowing the lump in my throat, but my mouth was dry. The air was stale, toxic, and I didn't know why. The woman's chest was pulsating, panting. I shifted on my foot, not taking a step, but just enough to glimpse the fuse at the bottom of my soul. The woman lifted her head, and I caught a glimpse of what her hair was masking. Her mouth had been stitched shut. Globlets of blood dribbled off her chin. I couldn't see her eyes, still hidden behind her bangs, but the way the crimson tears streamed down her face, I knew they had also been sewed. The woman perched on the floor. I found my pistol already in my hand. I stepped back off the mine, and the woman ran at me. I dropped my flashlight and opened fire, the muzzle blast giving me still images of the woman barreling toward me. I know I struck her a few times. I saw the bullets cutting through her flesh. But she kept on coming. My finger was automatically pressing the trigger, and before long I emptied my mag. The last still image I saw was on the ground, and the woman was standing over me. I had struck a few lights in the exchange, and now my dropped flashlight was the only thing piercing the darkness. I scrambled for the flashlight and turned it to the woman, but she was gone. I heard the door slam shut, and I violently panned to the source of the sound. I managed to catch the woman's foot disappearing behind a door, the same door that had belonged to the old woman. I frantically reached for the extra mag on my belt, reloaded my weapon, and tried radioing for backup. I was relieved when somebody finally answered this time. "Shots fired," I said. Almost instantly, I heard the sirens howling in the distance, but that wasn't the only thing howling. From the other side of the door, the old woman was pleading for help. Her muted screams filled me with resolve. "Help's on the way," I shouted through the door. The woman screamed as her voice gargled with the sound of death. I knew she was dying. I knew she wouldn't make it until backup arrived. I nearly pulled out my hair as I wrestled with my conscience. Unconsciously, I was already kicking the door down. "Help me! I'm dying!" the woman screamed. The door started to buckle as I heard the squelch of her flesh being torn apart. "Help me, please! I'm dying!" The door finally let go, and the room instantly went quiet. "Police, come on out!" I tried to sound authoritative, but my voice was quivering. I panned the light as I walked into the living room and found the old woman standing in a corner, her back towards me. "Show me your hands," I commanded, but the woman didn't move. I cautiously made my way to her and nuzzled my gun into her shoulder. Still, she didn't move. There was a lamp on the other side of the room that had shattered on the ground, and I frantically looked in that direction. Behind the couch, a person's hand gripped the fabric, and I knew who it was. Resolve building in my chest. "Hands! Show me your effing hands!" The woman let go of her hold on the couch, her spine unfurling like a serpent, readying itself to strike. The stitches that once held her mouth shut were now ripping apart and hanging off her face. Though her eyes remained closed, she opened her mouth, showing me her teeth. They were filed down to a point, all of them. She hissed, and I raised a shaky gun toward her face. "Get on the ground!" That was when a pair of teeth sunk into my neck. It was the old woman's. She had latched onto my skin, her once gummy mouth now riddled with jagged fangs. The woman from the hall just stood there, listening to me fight to get the hag off my neck. I bashed her head with the butt of my flashlight, thunked her with my fists, pulling out clumps of hair with my hands, but nothing loosened her jaw. I heard the swashing of blood as she sucked into her mouth. My legs were starting to go limp, my vision hazy. I was losing consciousness. The world began distancing itself. I was drifting away, dying. My body was growing cold, my heartbeats becoming hollow. I dropped the flashlight, and that was the last time I saw the light. My eyes no longer worked, but I saw everything. Heard everything. The spiders weaving their cobwebs in the corner, their mouths smacking as they shaped their masterpieces. I felt the earth turning underneath me, the cold midnight air, and the heat of the day cresting the horizon somewhere in the east. I felt the building growing old, the wooden boards in the walls slowly rotting, withering away. And that's when I saw them. All of them. The apartment complex should have been teeming with life, the units filled with a rhythmic flurry of heartbeats. But the only thing I heard was the growling of their stomachs as they pressed an ear to the walls. As the old woman fed on my body, as my blood drained into her mouth. My heart pumped for one last time, and I no longer felt any physical pain. The dread coursing through my veins when a car's brakes squealed into the parking lot. Help had arrived. The two women retreated into the halls, leaving me on the floor. It wasn't long until a radio sputtered from down the hall and an officer walked into the room. Moments ago, he would have been my saving grace, but now I was his demise. His arteries pulsed in his neck, and I wanted to sink my teeth into his skin, to refill the void the old woman had left behind, but I couldn't. I knew this man. He was a friend, and I couldn't do to him what had been done to me. Suddenly, the building was empty. While I was listening to the thudding of my buddy's heart in his chest, the things in the building managed to scurry away. They were gone. Dozens of officers arrived and taped off the area. That sat me in the back of an ambulance where they tried to take my vitals, but I refused, telling them I was okay. They took my service pistol, a standard precaution after an officer discharged his gun. I know I'll be on desk duty for a while as they investigate me for discharging my gun, but I'm not sure if I could sit in a room filled with a dozen beating hearts. I came home last night to find my worried wife waiting for me at the door. Someone from work had given her a call and told her that I was shaken up, but okay. I smelt the anguish in her blood. It gave her copper-scented flesh a tinge of saltiness. She hugged me and tried to kiss me, but I pulled away. I would have sunk my teeth on her lips if she had. I sat on my couch all night, fighting not to tear my wife's neck open. But the longer I fought, the worse my stomach growled. A taste wouldn't hurt. I stood over her, trying to restrain myself, but found myself tracing my tongue on her skin. She playfully pushed me away, caressing the back of my head, but I lost control. The next thing I knew, she was lying lifelessly under me. I waited for her to wake up, just as I did, but for some reason she didn't. She was gone. I'd killed her. My body was momentarily replenished, but at what cost? I was already growing hungry again, and the love of my life was gone. This was supposed to be my suicide note, but when I put a bullet in my mouth, it didn't work. I want to die. I don't want to live like this, to be this thing, this monstrosity. Someone else is going to come looking for me when I don't show up for work tonight. I don't want to hurt anyone else, but as time drones on, I'm conflicted. Now I'm not sure if I want them to stay away, or if I want someone to come asking questions. I don't think I can restrain myself if they do. And I'm not sure I want to restrain myself.